All right, so 5.12 sustainability. So, sustainability is when like the definition of this term is consuming a resource or using a space in a way that doesn't deplete or degrade it for generations to come. So, we want to use it in a way that's responsible so that it's not just, tragedy of the commons where we're completely deleting or, depleting a resource beyond future use. And so we want to kind of think about, what's going to happen in the future with future generations. So, an example of this would be using compost, which is just the breakdown of organic matter over using synthetic fertilizer. So because synthetic fertilizer is fossil fuel dependent, and so that has a limited amount of years left for us to use that resource. And so we want to in order to use a resource sustainably, we want to only use the maximum sustainable yield. This is basically or essentially the maximum amount of a resource that can be harvested without reducing or depleting that resource. Generally, that is about at half of the carrying capacity. So this basically maximizes the yield or the resources harvest and regeneration rate of the population. Okay, so if this is our population size, our maximum sustainable yield or the maximum amount of a renewable resource that can be harvested without depleting it would be approximately half of the carrying capacity for that resource. Okay. So here's our carrying capacity. If we look at this graph, here's the population size in the absence of harvesting. And so we want to reduce this by half. And so managers harvest at this population size so we can obtain our maximum sustained yield. Okay. And so, what are some environmental indicators of sustainability? These are factors that help us determine the health of the environment and guide us towards sustainable use of Earth's resources. So, in environmental indicators that show us if we're being sustainable and not includes things like biodiversity, whether that be genetic biodiversity, species, or ecosystem. And so higher biodiversity generally means healthier ecosystem. And if we find out that we have a decline in biodiversity, this can indicate things like pollution or habitat destruction, or even something like man made climate change. And so the global extinction rate right now is a very strong environmental indicator since species extinction decreases species richness on Earth. So, in other words, our global extinction rate is a factor that tells us how much biodiversity we're actually losing. Okay. And so, unfortunately, our biodiversity or extinction rate is fairly high. Okay. And so this chart kind of shows you the extinction rate since the 1900s of these various types of organisms on the planet. And so that just shows you that we are, losing biodiversity, and it's at 2.5% for amphibians. And that's not necessarily, extremely detrimental. So we're not at a rate that is, um, you know, causing the complete breakdown of our ecosystems around the world. However, it is something to be aware of and to realize that, we need to work on, maximizing our biodiversity. Okay, food production. Food production indicates the ability of our soil, our water, and our climate to support agricultural practices. So, if there are major threats to food production, things like climate change and soil degradation, and when we talked about in past sections, we talked about desertification and the erosion of topsoil. And then also, we talked about groundwater depletion. All of these things are an indicator of our sustainability in those areas. And so this just shows you the projected impact of climate change on agricultural yields. This is a real problem, as we can see from this graph. Anything that is red means that by 2060, this is going to be a real issue, and we're going to have a loss of basically agricultural food production in these areas that are red and even orange. And so you can really see that the southern United States, Mexico, northern South America, really pretty much all, I mean, even this yellow is not ideal. The light green is, better, but nowhere in South America do they even have a green area, which is actually good. I mean, that's actually a decent thing. So anything that's yellow or not yellow, I'm sorry, yellow is kind of zero. So that's like no change in agricultural yields, but anything that is um, the, moving towards the green and the black spectrum, that's going to be like a positive change. So, really, in this whole Western hemisphere, just North America and like northern North America, so our northern states and then Canada is where we're going to see an increase in agricultural yields. Same thing, there's going to be an increase in agricultural yields across Russia, Europe, Northern Europe, China. But any place in Africa, I mean, there's like no place we're going to be able to like really grow food well in Africa or Australia or India. So areas the Middle East, there's going to be real food insecurity throughout major parts of the world, and we're going to have major agricultural shifts as predicted by the year 20 in the 2060s. So that's not far away. That's within 40 years. So, increasing meat consumption actually puts a further strain on food production. So, we should try to move to more of a plant based diet, and just maybe cut down. We don't not necessarily eliminating meat, but maybe cutting down on our meat consumption. Global grain production per capita has leveled off, and we're starting to see signs of decline in recent years. So that is a real problem and something that will be an issue as we move closer and closer to the 20, 50, 2060 years. Atmospheric temperature and CO2, life on Earth depends on a very narrow temperature range that is our optimal range. And CO2, as we know, is a greenhouse gas, GHG, that's what that's an acronym for. And basically, what that means is that CO2, because it's an increased gas in our atmosphere, it's trapping Earth's radiation or the sun's radiation, and it's actually warming the Earth's atmosphere. So, increased CO2 means increased temperatures. And so, this is a diagram that sort of shows how that heat is trapped. And you can see here that as our CO2 increases, and how much that it has increased, we also see a positive correlation to our um, global temperature increases from the 1900s on. So really, since industrialization, went into full swing. In the 1800s, it was rising, and then in 1900s, we can really see an issue. Deforestation contributes to our loss of CO2 sequestration, which is not a good thing. So, as we urbanize and we have urban sprawl, we're cutting down those trees. And then, obviously, the combustion of fossil fuels through the emission of carbon dioxide increases the atmospheric CO2 as well, which just further compounds the issue with rising global temperatures. So, increasing CO2 equals unsustainable um, habitats and we're going to dry out all of our arable farmable land, and it's actually worsening storm intensities, and we're starting to see more of these super hurricanes that are occurring that are really just wiping out areas along the coastline. But actually, we're starting to see that it's, North Carolina, the Asheville, North Carolina area, which is so far away from the ocean that we didn't in the past think that it would even be impacted by hurricanes more than just getting a little rain, is now experiencing complete destruction. All right, human population and resource depletion is another factor that we can use to determine our sustainability and how well we're doing with those practices. As human population grows, resource depletion grows. And so we can see the size of the world population over the last 12,000 years. Resources at this point are being harvested unsustainably from natural ecosystems, and we're actually degrading ecosystem health. So we're not just taking that 50%, that sustainable yield, we're actually moving way beyond that. And so we need more paper because of the population growth. So more paper equals deforestation. We need more food. More food to support our population means that we're going to have more soil erosion from farming, more deforestation to create more farmland, and more groundwater depletion because we're trying to irrigate our crops. And so all of this is an issue. As we have more people, we're traveling more. People are moving around. And so that's going to cause us to rely more on fossil fuels. And so we have to mine more fossil fuels. And then this impacts the air, the water, and it increases all of the pollution in these areas. So air, water, and soil pollution increases, and we destroy more habitats. And so this just shows you the cumulative deforestation from 1800 to 2010, just to give you an example here of what this depletion looks like. And you can see as the population has grown, so has deforestation. All right, practice FRQ 5.12. Explain which student most likely lives in a highly developed country by looking at this chart. Describe how one of the four categories of ecological footprint can serve as an environmental indicator. All right, and next up on our notes will be 5.13, reducing urban runoff. See you guys next time.